Yeah, 1026. We are live. How's everybody doing? Today we're going to talk about, you know, seems to be popular for most people, making torque, particularly, excuse me, just got back from a run, um, particularly on 6 liter. So, how do we make more torque from a 6 liter? And so, what I want to talk about today are the 706 heads versus the 799 heads, and which one of those you would pick if you're trying to make more torque. So, which one of those would you pick if you're trying to make more torque? Would you pick the small chamber, small valve, small port 706 heads, or would you pick the larger port, larger valve, larger chamber 799 heads that also flow more? And we know that they make more power. We know that they can make more power because they flow more air. So I've run that comparison. I have videos up where we compared basically all of the stock cathedral port heads, 317, 241, which is the LS1 head, 317 6 liter truck head, and then the 799 slash 243, and then the 706 slash 862 heads. And on the 5.3, the smaller heads seemed to do better. And then on the 6 liter, the smaller heads made more, low speed power up to, like, let's say 4,500 or 5,000 or so. And then the 799 heads made more peak power, which is actually is kind of exactly what I would expect. In the lower engine speeds, the motor doesn't have like an airflow deficit. So it's not needing the extra airflow that better heads would offer until higher in the RPM range, because that's where it's using more airflow. It's wanting more airflow. And if it had more airflow, it would make more power. But it has plenty down low. So if you go to wide open throttle at 2000 RPM, almost any of these cylinder heads has enough power or has enough airflow to satisfy that power level. So the head's not really a restriction. Then other things would come into play, like, port volume, valve size, coefficient of discharge, all these things that might help to a smaller extent, would help torque production and stuff down low. So the question becomes, which one of those would you pick if you're looking for torque? And as a general rule, you're thinking, oh, well, I'm going to pick the small one that has lower, or it has more compression, smaller valves, more torque, all of the things that say more torque on it. It's smaller valve, higher compression. It has all the things that we would normally associate out in internet land with torque production. But that's why I test, because just that sort of speculation isn't really enough. You need to actually know what's happening, because it might be that, and this has been the case with lots and lots of head tests that I've done, down at 2000 or 2500 RPM, we compare lots of different cylinder heads and they're the same there. Because the cylinder head, like flow and other things that come into play later on in the RPM range, they happen out there, but down there, they're not influencing that greatly. So we'd have to look at other things. Like I said, it's not a flow rate of the cylinder head so much as it might be some of the other things. And even those things, the lower the engine speed that we go, all of these things become less and less critical. It gets down to the point where it's almost just displacement. The motor's this big, it spins over this much, it's spinning over this fast, it draws in this amount of air, and we could try to trick it with some other things. But really, it's just this is what it does. And so it gets really hard to do power improvements at lower engine speeds. It becomes difficult. You have to get really, really good at what you're doing, and you're looking at not very big gains, because the lower the engine speed, the less you're going to influence horsepower. But the amount that you're influencing horsepower is multiplied, so you get a bigger torque gain there than you do horsepower out past 52, which is the number that's used. It's the constant used in the calculation for horsepower versus torque. Out past that, then you get greater gains for horsepower with any change in torque. But trying to get the torque down low, and so this will be our poll actually for today. Start a poll. Okay, if you're building a 6-liter make torque, would you pick 706 heads over 799 heads? So this will be interesting. And for a number of reasons, and these are all things that we're going to talk about today. So we need to look at a couple of things. I've done this test already, and so you can go look at the dyno results and go, hey, look, it did this, it did this. Even looking at those results, there are a lot of things to talk about. So are you more interested in, just right off the bat, are you more interested in torque production below 5,000, or are you interested in it above that? That's one thing that we get just from those dyno results. But the other thing that we don't get is most people are not, when they're towing, are not running at wide open throttle. They're not running at wide open throttle at 2,000 RPM or 2,500 RPM. We've talked about that many times. But they might be running at lots of part throttle, so half throttle or 3/4 throttle when they're taking off or going up a hill or those kinds of things. Do you guys think that at those throttle angles that would tend to favor the smaller port, smaller valve, smaller chamber head even more so? Because that's one of the things that we don't argue, that we talk about at Westech, is that we run at wide open throttle, and it, let's, in these low speed numbers at 2,000 or 2,500 RPM, we're doing a dyno pull at wide open throttle. Now, I've also done them at half throttle too, but more to see kind of what the restriction for the throttle body was in that case. And it's not much of a restriction down low, but more as we go up, which we would expect. But it is some, at least half throttle. It is some restriction down low also. But when you're driving around, you're not driving around at wide open throttle doing that stuff, not like the way that a dyno test does. So the kinds of torque that you are looking to get and trying to experience when you're wanting more torque is also part throttle dependent. So would we see greater gains at part throttle with these smaller heads if you were choosing the smaller head? Because I would also argue the opposite of that. In this comparison between a 799 head and a 706 head, at least the one test that I did showed that the 799 head made more low speed power. Now, all of the 799 243 guys that get mad because we know that Will Hansel's book on LS stuff way back in the day said, oh, you got to put 243 heads on everything, and GM put 243 and 799 heads on a lot of the 4.8 and 5.3 and basically in the Gen 4 stuff, they put it on a lot of them. And so that must be the ultimate head. And according to Will, that you got to put back then it was LS6. You got to put LS6 stuff on everything. That's part of why I did that test. Well, yeah, I understand the logic behind that. That's a better head. It flows more air. It's got bigger valves. It can ultimately make more power. And if making more power was your thing, particularly on a 6-liter, I probably would pick that. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about torque. And again, we'd have to look at when we say, okay, we're trying to make more torque. Where are you trying to do that? Are you trying to make more, like I talked about, part throttle torque, transitional stuff? Are you trying to make more torque at 2,000, 2,500, 3,000, 3,500? If you're trying to make, and this is the other thing that you need to look at, is if you're trying to make more torque and choosing between those two heads, what camshaft are you going to use? Because here's the thing that a lot of guys don't know is, and I have lots of this data to look at, but if you pick a small torque cam, it doesn't make as much peak torque as a bigger performance cam does. I was just looking at a comparison between a combination that I put together that had a small, like, stage 1 truck cam or a torque cam, or even like a Truck Norris or my Lobach truck camshaft. That's not going to make as much peak torque as a bigger cam does. So a lot of people think that these smaller cams, they're going to make a lot more torque. Well, yes and no. They could make more torque in some RPM range where you would be losing torque from the bigger cam, but they're not going to make more torque. They're not going to make more peak torque, and they're not going to do it at wide open throttle. Now, if wide open throttle isn't your test, and also peak torque at 4,800 or 5,000 RPM isn't your metric, then that's not as important. But just to say that it makes more torque is not accurate. And the same thing with the 706, 799 head. Which one of them makes more peak torque? It's probably going to be the bigger head. I need to go back and look at that at that actual test data and see. But because the bigger head made more peak power and did it from, you know, somewhere after 5,000 and up, it may also have made as much or more peak torque. So is that the thing? Probably not. Most guys, what they're looking for is a huge difference down in the range where you'd be using, you know, torque for towing. So let's say, you know, let's say 4,500 or even 5,000 and below. And most guys are more interested in it, because I know, having driven my truck many times back and forth to Vegas and having to go up over the Grapevine and the various grades that we've driven on, you're looking at not having to go full throttle and not having to drop down into another gear in your made of glass 460E transmission, in my case, and particularly not having to ever drop down into second gear, which that, in my opinion, is what ultimately breaks these transmissions. But if you can go up these grades, particularly if you're towing something, and stay in third gear with the converter unlocked, that's okay. If you have enough torque to do that, and in that range, you would be probably closer to, you know, 2,500 or 3,000 RPM. Can you make lots of extra torque there? That, in my opinion, is where guys would be most interested in having it. That's where I would be most interested in having it. I'd like to have more there. So for me, that would be my metric. But maybe other guys want it, you know, other places. So again, we've got a moving goalpost here, and it's hard to determine exactly what people want. Now, obviously, when we show a combination where we ran boost on it and it had boost at 2,500 RPM and made more power from 2,500 RPM everywhere, basically, and made an extra 100 or 150 foot-pounds of torque, we all want that. That's just nothing but good there. But doing that naturally aspirated is much more difficult unless we you know, do a stroker motor and increase displacement, then we can get big gains there. But trying to get big gains down there in 2,500, 3,000 RPM becomes difficult. It's very difficult to do with cam timing. And I would argue that it's very difficult to do also with cylinder heads. Compression is a way to do that, because compression adds power everywhere. It adds a percentage of power everywhere, basically, especially in the sweet spot range that I like to look at between 8 to 1 and 12 to 1. You get pretty good gains there. Below that and beyond that, the gains become, because you're starting to trade things, the gains become less consistent and a smaller percentage of the total. But you can get gains from that. You can also do things with, you know, pressure wave enhancement, I would call it. So runner length in the intake manifold, primary length in the headers, you can do that kind of stuff. Obviously, this assumes that the tune is spot on and that you can run enough timing and stuff. Because if you have to pull timing out, like my truck is doing right now, because the knock sensors, it's really soft, because it has, you know, imagine what your combination is like with 6 or 8 degrees of timing pulled out of it. It's just terrible. So we're assuming that those things are right. But you can get, you know, added torque from long tube headers. You can get added torque from longer runner intake manifolds, which is hard to find something that's longer than the factory one already. But a truck manifold is pretty torquey as things go. I've tried various intake, and when I say intake, I'm talking about air intake runner length before the throttle body, and haven't seen big changes in RPM or in power from those. But honestly, I'd like to go back and revisit that and see if, you know, I can change power at 2,000 RPM. Now, we changed power on 4-cylinder applications a lot by changing the tubing length of the air intake system. So I did a bunch of testing on, and we measured air temperature and top speed and all kinds of things back when I did that. I just didn't see as much of that on the V8. We didn't see big changes from that. Once it had enough airflow where you weren't restricting the airflow, it didn't seem very sensitive to the length of that tubing. But I'd like to do more testing on that to find out. but it's very difficult to get added torque down in that RPM range if you have already enhanced the one that you have. So if you have a combination, you have a 6-liter, let's say you have if you have 317 heads on it, any head that you pick is going to be better than that, because it's going to enhance power production, because the 317 head has a really big combustion chamber on it and a not terribly efficient combustion chamber on it. So if you put a 706 head on there, you're going to go up in compression a lot, enough to where you should be concerned with that on a flat top piston LQ9. On the LQ4, I think that that's a good combination. Putting a set of 706 heads on it, particularly a set of 706 heads that you did unshrouding of the valve, maybe put a bigger valve in it, but definitely unshrouding of the valve, maybe do a little bulwark on it. Put that head on in place of a 317 head, and your truck motor, your 6-liter truck motor, will be much torqueier, particularly if you have the tune proper on it, and you can do that. But once you optimize the tune on those, going from a 317 head to a 706 head or a 799 head, like I said, unless you're nitpicking it like I am on the engine dyno, I don't know that a lot of guys would be able to tell the difference between those two. But the other thing to think about here is if let's say you got a little bit more peak power with the 799 head and a little more low speed torque in some range with the 706 head, the question that I always posed to people was, well, what about cost? It's much harder to find 799 and 243 heads, and they're much more valued by people. I blame Will Hansel for telling everybody that they need these heads, but they do work well and they flow well, and they're the best flowing cathedral port head that you can put on there. And so everybody wants them. So subsequently, their value and their cost, if you have to buy them, is more than a 706 head. As you could go find, I can go to a wrecking yard, you can find 706 and 862 heads. I can find a dozen of those, because all of the motors that I go see are 4.8s or 5.3s, and they almost all have those. Once in a while, I'll find some 799 or 243 heads. A lot of times, I'll find 799 and 862 heads just laying on the ground. The guys have pulled off because they're trying to get to something else in the motor. And so they're just there. And if you bought a 4.8 or 5.3 previously, you already have those kinds of heads. If anybody upgraded those heads, most people have a few sets of those just sitting around. So and guys will just give them away basically. So they're really easy to get, and they don't cost very much. So if you have to look at a cost difference between getting a set of 706 heads to put on your junkyard 6-liter or 799 or 243 heads, most everybody is going to spend more on those bigger heads. But are you getting anything for that? For a torque thing, I don't think you would. My combination for a torque thing on an LQ4 or an LY6 is to put a set of 706 heads on it. I would spend some time unshrouding the valve on it to have it go out to, scribe it for the 6-liter bore size, and then unshroud the valve so that you can get some more airflow out of it, because that's going to be nothing but beneficial. If you did that, those heads would flow as much as a 799 head. If you milled the 799 head, you could also get that. If you want to use those, that's fine. That also works. I would do the same thing. I would unshroud the valve to get more airflow on the 6-liter head. But my input is that either one of those would work. But if you take an LQ4, put a 706 head on, or 799 head it, modified it if you want to, the way that we talked about, put a small kind of cam in it, the low buck truck camshaft that I have, a torque cam, some kind of torquey, small, low duration camshaft, and then keep the truck manifold, put long tube headers on it. I think you'd have a fairly torquey combination in the towing RPM range. Now, it's not going to, it's going to make a lot more power than stock, but it's not going to, it's not going to rev out and make lots of power for you to go out and win races. But that's a different kind of build. If you wanted to do that, if you want a dual purpose deal, then we would look at something more dual purpose. The camshaft that I have, that low buck truck, is a good cam for also allowing you to make more power. So if you, it's going to be a good torque cam. It's going to offer a lot of low speed power. It's going to work well with either one of those heads and that intake manifold. And it also, if you wanted to take this thing and take it to the track or whatever and rev it and rev to 6,500, 7,000, or not 7,000, 5,500, 6,000 and a 6-liter, even probably as high as 6,500. It would be on the downside of the curve, certainly there on a 6-liter, but it would still do that. And particularly if you did a little bit of porting on it would probably make good power. So it's a really good, I think it's a really good dual purpose cam, but it'd be more tailored toward the driver and drivability kind of thing, and especially torque production. Now you could do that with all the other 6-liters. The thing that I would worry about on an LQ9 with a flat top piston and a 706 head with a small chamber is that, yeah, it's going to help and it's going to add power everywhere. It's going to add torque. It's going to be a better combination. But most people are going to have to take timing and stuff away if you run the motor at temperature, the way it is in the vehicle, and you're towing things with it. The compression is going to be high enough where I think you're going to have to take away the timing that's going to take away some of the power gain that you got from putting in the torque, low speed torque that you get from putting that combination on there, because it's going to be, unless you soften the chambers, it's going to be sensitive to detonation. I don't think you'd have nearly as much of a problem on an LQ4 or an LY6 as you would on an LQ9. So on an LQ9, I think I probably would recommend the 799 or 243 head. So let me know what you guys think here. I'm curious to see. I'm curious to see how, if you're building a 6-liter make torque, would you pick 706 heads over 799? So a little bit more picking the 706 heads, but 57.43 right now. YouTube, Taylor, what's going on? Both milled and same size valves. No, the heads, at least the head test that I did, McKinney, were the stock heads, so that they were the way that they came from the stock. Now you can put them in any way that you want. Venturis are nice. Thanks for sharing, Scott. Pick the smallest chamber. 243 is the same as a 799. Yep. I said no because the heads are going to be probably good enough, and the money saved by leaving the heads can go to a rear gear for towing. Yeah, or a converter, that kind of thing too. I have a 2500 HD that I like to get more torque out of, 2000 to 5000. Is yours Tyler's yours a 6-liter? 706 862s are the same. Running 243s in my 6-liter. Those are good. Those would have come on a lot of aluminum 6-liters. Exhaust valves on these valves is exactly the same, by the way. More compression equals more power. That's right. Of 2001 LQ4, I rebuilt it and added 44 cubic inches to the 6-liter. So did you put a 4-inch stroke in it then? Did you make it like a 408? And then a 4030 bore? I want maximum power potential. I will live with the drawbacks. Then go with a bigger cam. 706 has smaller combustion chambers, 61 versus 65 on the 799. So there's a compression difference. Yes, there is on the stock motors. And then also the 317 head has even bigger chambers. I think ours were 71 or 72 cc's. Same thing with the factory rec port heads. But when I did the test, we tested all of them in stock trim. And actually, ours wasn't 4 cc's different when we actually measured them. Ours was closer to 2.5 to 3 cc's. Put 706 heads on my 6-liter with a BTR hot rod cam. It's a solid combo with plenty of average horsepower. That's good. I really don't think the engineers built the 799 heads to be worse than the 706 heads. I'd pick 799 heads every time. So you're extrapolating from something that you think that they would have been thinking at the time, and you're using that over actual dyno data to make your decision? I don't agree with that. They made the 243 heads and the 799 heads. They made those for a specific application, and then started putting them on other applications. They made those for the LS6 motor, and then they made them for the 6-liter performance applications, and then started applying them to other stuff. I have 706 heads, 1 3/4 long tubes, truck Norris cam, cold air, electric fan upgrade on my 2002 6-liter, and it's great. Lots of torque download. That would be a good combination. 2800 to 3400 converter, 410 or 456 gears, milled 243s. This is what we used to do. That's good. That's a good combination. Add cubic inches. That's right. That displacement does help torque. It's not difficult to get massive amount of torque from 1,000 to 2,500 RPM. It's called a diesel. Yes, that does add. A turbo diesel definitely adds torque down there. We're talking about pickup trucks. Yes, we're talking. That's what I'm talking about, because this channel has nothing to do with like 18-wheeler diesel engines. What about a 5.7? Yes, a 5.7 does the same thing. Drove a 427 tall block and a semi hauling for years. Nice. They did use that tall deck, that the 366 and 427, in a lot of trucks. I remember driving delivery trucks for furniture stores that had those in there. $7.99, have them shaved. Yep, you can mill the $7.99 heads. GM made gasoline V12, 706 cubic inches for semi trucks too. Cool. Stock 5.3 with GTX 3584, makes 5 pounds at 65 miles an hour, 1900 RPM, locked up in high gear. There's no reason to downshift. It has diesel-like torque. Yeah, as long as you can have the tune correct for boost at 1900 RPM. What's the Lobot truck cam? Justin, that cam is a 552 lift, 212, 220 something at 50, and then 107 LSA. I have those. They're 179 chip, so they're good cams for this kind of application that we're talking about. My 4.8 I'm replacing with a 6-liter has 706 heads, so that's what I'm going with. That's a thing. And I tell people that all the time, particularly with any cylinder head, because when I came out with the two versions of me running those heads, where we ran the 706, 241, 317, and 799 heads on the 5.3, and then I did the same thing on the 6-liter to test them all, because all of the 799 guys lost their mind about this test, about this video. I got so many comments on this. Oh, you need to make the chamber size the same. No, I don't. I didn't decide what size chambers the factory made their heads when they designed their heads. I didn't pick that. I'm not the guy that did it. I'm just the guy that's running all the stock heads. Same thing with it, to a lesser extent with the 799 heads, and I also compared the 706 heads to the Recport heads, to the LY6 heads. Oh, you need to make the chamber sizes the same. No, I don't. They're stock heads, and that's what they came with, and that's what I tested them with. And so I just wanted to see how all the factory heads did. If we start modifying them, then there's no limit to how we would modify them. Should we put the same valve size in the 706 heads and port those heads to make them flow the same as the 799 heads? No, that's ridiculous. But it's also ridiculous to mill the 799 heads to equal the 706 heads. It's just the 799 head guys whining and complaining and wanting their head to do as well as the smaller head does. I don't care which head does best. It doesn't make any difference to me. I just report on what happens. I'm not seeking a goal or not seeking an outcome. I'm doing a test, and then there's an outcome, and then I talk about that. And so guys guys obviously complain about that. But the one thing I can say is there's way more 706 and 862 heads out there than there are 799 and 243 heads, and they're much less expensive to get. But when guys are talking about, well, what head should I use on my turbo motor? You just use the head that you have. I don't care if it's a 241 or a 317 or a 799 or 706 head. If I was putting together a 4.8 or a 5.3 or a 6-liter and I wanted to do it cheap as possible, I just use the head that I have. I just put springs on it. I put a cam in it. I put a turbo on it, and injectors and a pump and an intercooler, and make sure that it's tuned properly. Because the amount of power that you can get from that, you can get all of the power out of that turbo with that combination, regardless of what cylinder head you have. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Well, I have the 317 heads that Richard doesn't like. No, Richard doesn't not like those. It's just that when you test them and run them at the same boost as another head that made more power NA, it will also make more power under boost. But none of that stops you from turning the boost up. It's a lot less expensive if one head is better than the other and it makes more power at the same boost. Well, there's not a limitation in the amount of boost that I could run. If you tested them at 8 pounds and I run mine at 10, then I make more power than you. That's right, you do. And that's the thing that I tell people. It's just whatever head you have, you just use that on your Turbo LS and it will work just fine. Let's see. We've got super low mile 5.3 with 862 heads, $100 hot cam at my disposal. That's nice. There's plenty of grungy sets of 243 heads in my parts stash, so that's also good. I'm tempted to cam slap it and go. What would you do? I don't think you could go wrong with either one of those. I don't think you're going to get much from a 243 head on a 5.3, particularly if you don't do anything to it. In fact, I would argue that that's going to be a step down. So put the camshaft in it. In a 5.3, I would run the 862 heads. If you want to do something, if you're in the mood to do modifications, like I said, I would do the porting on the 862 heads, and then I would put those in. But you're not going to go wrong with either one of those. And like I said, if you look at the dyno results, you would have to have a dyno to be able to measure what the difference is. David, what's going on? Would the TVSS intake help down low at all on an LQ4? No, not compared to the original truck manifold. Just got an L33. I'm planning on putting an LSA blower. Should I keep the 799 heads or use 317s? If it already has 799s, I would just put those on it. About to build a 5.7 LS1 for a friend's jet boat. Need the engine super light. Can't spin over 4,500 for the jet drive. What cam would you go with the 706 heads trying to make power way down low? So below 4,500, I would be tempted actually to run some kind of single pattern cam, I think. Like that BTR torque cam is probably a pretty good choice. But I would like to try specific cams for that application. So 4,500 RPM is the ceiling for RPM. Then I would try some tricky things with that. Like I might try single pattern cams. Or I might try something with a tight LSA. I don't know how the idle needs to be for that, but it's not going to be something that has a lot of duration in it. Maybe like a maybe like a 206 or a 210 kind of thing, and then a tight LSA at 106 or 107 or something. Richard, 6-liter stock bottom end, adding a 200 shot of nitrous. Do I need to add ring gap? I think you're right on the edge. Or I would recommend that you do. If the motor's out and you can do it, you should do it. It would be better, and you're not going to hurt it. We've run 200 shots on stuff before and not had ring gap in it. But I don't think I would do it long term. And what we're doing on the engine dyno is not the same as what you would be doing at the track. PSI school bus 540 8.8 liter, the king of 87 octane. Yeah, the big gas engines with low compression, the same reason that you do it in boat applications where you're running sustained load for a really long time. For towing, those actually work pretty well. Richard, I'm building a 6-liter to put in a Land Rover Discovery. What cam would you recommend? It's primarily going to be a daily, but also capable of off-road. Gabe, that cam that I have would be good. I have the Lowbuck truck camshaft would be good for a day. That's the cam that I recommend for guys that have the daily, like a Trek Norris, Chupacabra. The Lowbuck truck that I have is less expensive than both those others. But that kind of cam is what I would try to recommend for that. I think we'd all agree that 317s are garbage. We ran ported 317s on the 1,500 horsepower Big Bang motor that I did on the Big Bang 6-liter that I did. So I don't, like I said, that's why I don't discount them. I know that they're capable. They just have not as good chamber design, and also, a big chamber, which lowers compression. But again, if you have those, I would put those on. I don't think I would do what a lot of guys were doing back in the day. And I think from the videos that I put out, that's helped stop people from doing this, is like, I wouldn't take a 4.8 and put 317s on it, to try to lower the compression. I think that's a terrible idea. That's just going to make it really, and then put an LS9 camshaft in it, and then put a short runner manifold on it, and wonder why the boost doesn't come on until 6,500 RPM. That's just going to make it really, really soft. But if you have a 6-liter that has 317s on it, and you put a cam and springs in it and a turbo on it, it's actually going to work pretty good. And it's going to be, it's going to have a bigger tuning window, so it's going to be less susceptible to detonation because of the lower compression. Trying to do talk to text. 823s are awesome, but they put VVT in those engines to compensate for compression loss. Yeah, and variable cam timing, if you can adjust that, obviously is a good thing for shifting the power curve. Every head is a turbo head. That's right. Use a cross ram. The cross ram is good. A long runner manifold does work well down low. Slight popping coming from the mic. It might be the it might be my fan. I have a fan, just one. People get caught up in power numbers. That's right. Richard, have you actually paid attention to like an LQ4 versus a stroker 4-inch 4-inch stroke? How much more torque would you see? Yeah, I have direct results for that. Building a turbo 4.8 706 heads or 243s, G42 1450 1.1 AR V band. Which cam do you think is better for an LS Solstice car? Stage 3 truck cam or sloppy stage 2? Empty pockets. How much power are you trying to make? If you have a 4.8, I definitely would pick the smaller cam. I don't think I would pick a stage 3 truck cam. I would think I would pick something smaller than that for a 4.8. You could turn a set of 706 heads into 799 heads by using larger valves. The larger valves don't change the port volume, and they don't change the chamber volume. So it wouldn't make them into 799 heads. It would just make them into better 706 heads. But putting the bigger valves in does have the potential to add flow for that, particularly, as I said, if you could machine the chambers. It's a toss-up because the 5.7 I have has 799 heads, and my dead 4.8 has 862s. On a 4.8, I wouldn't run 799s or 243s on. I would definitely run 862s or 706s on it. I just looked at my 17 Silverado and it has 823 heads. Okay. Is it worthwhile to swap or mill them if planning to go to a Truck Norris cam? Milling them would help. It would help raise compression. But I think you'll be happy with the Truck Norris cam over the cam that you have in that Silverado right now. Much appreciate all the tech help. Let's see. $340 horsepower from a little 5.3 will be roughly double what the tired small block in the C10 made. Yeah, it's going to be a noticeable difference. Nicholas, you need to take a look and see. Don't think I would go more than 30 thousandths on milling them. You start running into problems with the intake fitting. Nicholas, you're running 85, 91 flex fuel tune. I have some calculations there. JE minus 5cc pistons, if I remember correctly, 227 cam. So they just have their flat tops with valve reliefs then if they're just 5cc's. My fan sounds like the Predator. I know I turned it off but it's hot up here because I'm upstairs. Super D sloppy stage infinity cam has the proper cam. That's right. Did you say chamber size is the same for 706 and 799? It's not. It's about 3 or 4 cc's difference. This one time at Camp. That's good. I like that. Points for that. It is getting hot in here, especially now that I have the fan off. Indoor house painting. I went for a run already this morning. It was already pretty hot out, but that's why I try to go early in the morning. But I don't mind running in the heat. Yeah, you're going to get hot and sweaty anyways when you're out there running. And I just figure, hey, if I can run in 90 or 100 degree temperature, then I'm just doing extreme training. Then when it's nice out, then I'm like, oh, this is like an easy run. Sorry, I'm wanting 700 to 800 reliable horsepower. Going to be all-purpose style car. Planning doing some street stick shift drag classes of it. Wanting a nice chop with good response, but high RPM capable. Okay, so let me see where you were at, Mr. Pockets. I still think you would be happier with like the cam that I have, or a Trek Norris, or a Chupacabra on a 4.8. I don't think I wouldn't put a sloppy stage 2 cam in a 4.8. It's going to be really, really soft. And even if you had a stock cam in it, it's not going to stop you from making the power that you want with a turbo. So that's very, very easy. So the like I said, the cam that I have, something like that, I would pick that over the cams that you mentioned there. Is the Engine Master show over? Yeah, they're not doing it anymore. It's only 22C here in Quebec. That would be nice. 72 would be nice. It's 92 right now. So can I safely take it to 20 or 30 off the heads, and they're currently at 10? When I talked to Machine Shop, they said my current setup would be around 10.2. I want 10.5 to 1. Well, why did you, Nicholas, why are you preoccupied with the number on the compression ratio? Well, where is the piston? Is the piston down in the hole? Is it out of the hole? You could also adjust that with head gasket thickness if you don't want to machine the head more now. Are you running a 53 head, a 53 thickness head gasket, or 041? You could adjust that too. When you said to open up the chambers on a 706 head, how much would it hurt for towing if I didn't? Nothing. It's not going to hurt it. Don't look at it as it's going to hurt it. You look at it as you're here right now, and then if you open the chamber up and unshroud the valve and maybe do some bulwark, it's going to help. But it's not going to go backwards because it didn't ever come like that. Cutting the 706 head for a 2-inch valve with proper relief can give you a chamber volume close to the 799 head. Yeah, I'm not worried about equaling the chamber volume. The chamber style is different between those two heads. And then, like you said, the port volume is also different. So the throat and everything is different. Budget's been my main concern. Yeah, the cam that I have is going to be much less than any of those cams that you mentioned. So my cam's 179 shipped, and it's new in the box. There's a ton of very expensive work that can be done for small gains, or a turbo that will spool as soon as you put the pedal down. Will double the gains at $1,500-ish bucks. You can size the turbo to come on when you want it to come on. What's the specs of the larger cam? The other cam that I have is 219, 225 585 and a 111. 96 degrees with 80% humidity. Frey, I need to send you my turbo head so you can make my turbo head work. The turbo 1 liter head. Do you have hollow cams? I wonder what it would cost to gun drill the cams. And I wonder if it would do anything. What cam is 179? I have cams for sale, and they're 179 shipped to you. And it would work for your Turbo 4.8. Already have new 660 tick performance valve springs, trending upgrade, chromoly push rods. I'm debating on the cam choice. Okay. People usually drop the compression so they can run more boost. That is a good option. But on a 4.8, I wouldn't put 317 heads on it to drop the compression. A 4.8 already has low enough compression in stock, so I don't think that I would do that. I'm going to put my email address up there for guys that might be interested in camshafts. Just send me an email and I'll tell you what you need to do. Empty pockets. I think I just gave you the specs. It's a 552 lift, 212, 220 something, and 107. The heads need, I think I only have stock valves with them right now. So I'd like to put slightly bigger valves in it and a valve job. We also filled in the injector holes. We welded them. And then a spring package. Dropping compression would just make it harder to spool the turbo. It does. Dropping compression lowers low speed torque production. You lose power from dropping compression. And so you have less energy to spool the turbo up. Boost over bottles. So you're a turbo guy and not a nitrous guy. 706 and 862 are the same, just different casting procedures. The 219 can be a decent street cam for a turbo 6.2 with an L3 intake manifold. Yeah, it would be. One of them is the low buck truck cam, and the other one is the truck plus, that 219 cam. So for a 6.2, that would be a good cam. Hollow cams are made by Japanese and German brands. They weigh less, and rotating mass is always better. It's the hollow cams are not specific to nationalities or countries. The Ford modular cams are hollow. So and other people have hollow cams. In fact, I asked Brian about that not too long ago because I had 2 of his cams, and one of them was drilled all the way through and the other one wasn't. And I wanted to know what the deal was. So obviously gun drilling the cam is going to be more expensive, but it does change the weight of the cam. But because the weight is taken out of the center of the cam, the gains that you get from that are less. You get, you could argue that you get some and that you also get less weight, which is less weight in the engine and less weight in the vehicle. That's a better thing. But because of the calculation for moment of inertia, taking the weight out of the center does less than it does if it's out farther. Did you get the money straightened out with PayPal? Yeah, all of that's working good, Woody's. Thanks. I hear gun drilling cams from truck puller say it strengthens the cam. I'd like to see if that's the case. I like to see the difference in gun drill cams versus not. I would like to see that too. I'd like to see if that does anything. I know one thing that Mahovitz did. He did balancing the cams, because when you spin the cams, they were not he was doing modular Ford cams. They were not balanced. And so he went to great lengths with machining to make sure that the cam was dynamically balanced. And he said it was worth power. The 80s motors with 7-liter, 8-liter still spool turbos. Decent. You just have to factor compression ratio into the turbo choice. Actually need one of each and a t-shirt. Okay, I'm still waiting for my t-shirts to come in. Sodium filled cam with sodium filled valves. Just have the sodium inject from the cam up into the valve. Gun drilled cam and a hydraulic press. Drilling a hole through the center can actually make it stronger. For example, that's why crank pins are drilled through the center. A crank pin is hollow? How about a set of 799 shave 30 thousandths is the best of both worlds? I don't agree with that. I agree that you're going to shave at 30, you're going to make a better 799 head, but it's not going to be the same as a 706 head, because the difference between those two is not just compression. I mean, you're not talking about very much compression. Ours was only 2.5 cc's when I did my test, because we actually measured them. I actually cc'd both heads to make sure that they were what they were, only because you have variations in casting, in how the valve job is done, the height of the valve in the chamber and all that. So we actually measured it. And so that's really not very much. But between those two heads, the change in chamber size is only one thing. There are a lot of other differences between those heads. Valve size is a big difference. Port volume is a big difference. Chamber shape and design is a big difference. So you have a lot of things that are different about those heads, irrespective of what I think is a fairly minor change in compression. Big change in compression between either one of those heads and like a 317 head or a 823 head. They don't balance cams like a crank when they make them. These ones that he was getting were not balanced. All of these modular forward cams. And it was more of a problem on his application because he was spinning them fairly high. I think he was running them to 9,500. Building my first turbo LS combo out of some spare parts. Stock Gen 4 LQ4 bottom end, rings gapped, ported 243s, Trailblazer SS, 216 cam. Okay, S475. Yeah, that's like 1,000 horsepower combo. I think it's smart of you to use a 216 cam in that combination too. With that should help spool that turbo up a lot. Particularly if BorgWarner S475, most of those are T6 turbos, so it would definitely help spool that turbo up. I have a set of stock 317s, planning E85, maybe run those and throw the 243s on my 2500. Yeah, you can. The 317s are going to make it a little bit softer on spool up, but you can still make 1,000, or you can still max the turbo out if you wanted to do that. Are you still planning on sectioning heads to put on a secret project? Yes, that's still going. Cams spin slow, their diameter is so small, I don't think balancing one would make a perceivable difference. Big things, small things. Yeah, I think that he was more interested in imparting harmonics into really, really long timing chains and stuff. Do you get the bigger valves of the 799? So why would 706s be better than 799s that have been shaved? Did you not hear all the things that I just said? Bigger valves don't necessarily make more low speed power. So the smaller valve and the valve size relative to its flow is coefficient of discharge. So it's possible for the 706 head to have a better coefficient of discharge than a 799 has with a bigger valve. So the bigger valve is, you're acting like that's some sort of benefit. It could be for ultimate flow, but it may not be for average flow, and it may not be for coefficient of discharge, and it may not also be when you team that valve size with a particular port size. That's why people want to talk about all these little individual things. That's why I dyno tested them, so that we can just go by the dyno results. Here's what happened. It's better here, it's worse here, it's better here, whatever it is. then you can go in and go, well, it's because of this and this and this. And then you can argue about all that stuff. The reason I'm doing so much work to mine is I'm trying to make as much power as I can. 93 octane, you can make 200 horsepower on race fuel just by turning the boost up. You can't make 200 horsepower on a stock sprint motor. Certainly not with a stock turbo on it. It'd have to have a big turbo. You know how much gain I got at oversized valves next week. Should be done Friday. I would move the injector ports up into the intake. Yeah, that's what we've done. I've already made a different intake manifold. Because we're wanting to inject fuel into the manifold for added power. Because we're, in this instance, we're trying to get more power from this combination. I've been researching Desmo valve control and head before it's first used on car applications. It is cool stuff. And when you go down the rabbit hole on those things and you find that, hey, look, a lot of this cool stuff was done a long time ago. Turn the fan back on. Tell me if something happens to the mic. So where are we at? If you were building a 6-liter to make torque, would you pick 706 heads over 799s? 58% are saying yes, and 42% are saying no. Honestly, I would be torn between those two. Like I said, I think if you build the 799 heads, I think you would be fine. And I don't think you'd know the difference unless you actually tested the difference. The Predator's back. Let's see if I can get this. Maybe I can get this to block the mic a little bit. I haven't tried on my 1-liter sprint motor. I also haven't tried a different camshaft, which I know is going to add a lot of power. And when I say a lot, a percentage of a lot, not number a lot. Added a new vehicle to my fleet, 93 Volvo 240 GL. My first car that doesn't have a V8. So is it getting swapped? And what motor is in it? Is it a turbo motor? What brands do you recommend? Rods, pistons, springs. Pistons and rods, the Summit Pro LS stuff is good as long as they have it in stock. I like that stuff. Got 2 more minutes. 2 Minutos Mas. They've been snake hunting late. No, it's actually been too hot. I mean, even at night, it's too hot. I would need to go, if I was going to go out, I'd have to go like, I don't know, maybe 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning. And see, I'd have to go out when it's dark, but I haven't done that. Otherwise, it's way too hot. It's July and August are not really very good for snakes in this area because it's just too hot. They're underground. But that's a good idea, though, Mike. I maybe I'll do a night hunt. Ever seen cams or cranks made of billet aluminum or any material other than steel? So certainly haven't seen aluminum ones. Stock sprint short block. Yeah, I think that short block will definitely make the power. I've done 170 something at the tire. And that was, so maybe 200 is realistic because it had the stock, it had a mildly ported head on it, but the stock bottom end and a stock cam and stock intake and stuff. We had bigger injectors in it, obviously, and more fuel pump and stuff, but I was still saddled by the vane meter. But it had I think that was with a compound turbo system on it that we had on it. Cheap thermal sight. So do I got to walk around with night vision goggles on? 222 365 cam made 22 horsepower on the Geo engine. That's how much it added? That's a ton of power. Who made that camshaft? Was it a regrind one from the guys in Oregon or the guys down here in San Diego from Schneider? 222 would be about the cam that we would want for Bonneville. And is it a small base circle cam? If it's a regrind, I would think it would have to be. So what I'd like to do is set the head up with a valve height that will work with the small base circle cam and run the stock rocker assembly. Does it have a rocker assembly on it? As a Floridian, I could sympathize. Sometimes it's still 90 degrees at night. Yeah, it was like that when I lived in Vegas too. Florida, I would like to come out there and do some. We did some night hunting for snakes in Florida, which was cool. We did, driving on the road and stuff, and we're looking for pythons. It was fun. I want to go back. I'm ready to go back. I think in August is when they have their big official hunt that they that you can sign up for. My goal is just to find something that's big. Done some hog hunting, no python hunting. Yeah, they definitely have those out there. That's one of the things that we were concerned with traipsing out in the swamps is, there's lots of things out there, including hogs, that could potentially do harm. Kevin, okay, so you have 241 heads for the LS1. Those work too. No more than 84 degrees. Yeah, that's nice. That's still doable. Richard Irwin. I like sharks too. I like all that stuff. It's always me just walking out into the wilderness. We just had a down the road a little bit. We had there was a mountain lion sighting, I guess. I've never seen any. I've been out there in the wilderness by myself a lot. So I know that the rancher was saying in the ranch that I used to go to, because it went all the way up in the hills, and he said that there are mountain lions here. There are definitely hogs there. We saw those, but I never saw any tracks or anything like that. Just have to wrestle it, flip it over, rub its belly. I think that only works on lizards and sharks. One more minute. Pigs are eating snakes. They do. So do turkeys and peacocks. I ground up my friend owns Jar Race engines. Yes, it's a small base circle. If you look at the Geo engine, I actually had to cut The center journal, not good for reliability. Uh-oh. But I can have my Sprint, the Sprint Turbo. I can have that camshaft reground though, right? So a big mountain lion at Lake Nacimiento. I ran off when it spotted me. Oh, it ran off when it spotted you. Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, you don't want to run. That's not good. And on that note, it's time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I'll be back tonight. Tonight. Ooh.